Hey everybody, welcome to class. Today I'm going to work with you guys a little bit on Pro Tools and introduce it to you. I know that some of you are kind of new to this, and so this is a video about how to get started and set up with Pro Tools. And it also goes along with your reading this week when you do lessons 1 and lessons 2 out of the Pro Tools 101 handbook. So I'm going to share my screen with you so you can see what's going on here. And so every time you start working in Pro Tools, you're going to see the dashboard first of all. So here's the dashboard, and you're going to have some choices to make. And one of the first choices you make is about something called the bit depth and the sample rate. So you have those two things right here to start to think about. And each of those affects the quality of your recording and the way that it's going to be recorded. So if you open the sample rate menu, you have options ranging from 44.1 kilohertz all the way up to 192 kilohertz. Now, what the sample rate is it's the number of samples of audio carried per second. And kilohertz has to do with frequency. It's a way of measuring how much a frequency or a note or a pitch vibrates per second. That's called hertz. Kilohertz means thousands because kilo is thousands. So 44.1 thousand hertz. Anyway, the range of human hearing is about 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. And in order to accurately convert analog signal into digital signal that a computer could read, you need to double the range of hearing. So 20,000 doubled is 40,000. So anyway, that's why the lowest setting is 44.1 kilohertz, because with that you should be able to capture all the range of frequencies that a human being is capable of hearing. Now the other side to that is the bit depth, and the bit depth, the number of bits used for each sample is referred to as the bit depth. So it's how many bits are going to be used in that sample that you have selected. And the rule of thumb is the more bits you're using to sample with, the better representation of that dynamic range or amplitude you'll get. So in the book on page 12, it says, large binary words are able to quantify variations in amplitude with much greater accuracy. Now, binary word in this case means bit depth. So a large bit depth, it's able to quantify a variation in amplitude. What's a variation in amplitude? If something gets louder or softer, dynamics, right? So if you have a larger bit depth, it can process the dynamics of the recording better than a smaller bit depth can. So therefore, a 24-bit audio file will always more accurately reflect the dynamic range of the original sound than a 16-bit, more than a 16-bit audio file. So with a 24-bit audio file, you're gonna get more of an accurate representation of the dynamic sound. So another way to put it is that the bit depth is related to the amplitude or the volume of your recording, and the sample rate is related to the pitch of your recording or the frequency. And a nice rule of thumb is the higher those numbers are, the better quality you're going to have in your recording. So if you're trying to make a professional sounding recording and you want it to sound the best it can, then you're going to want to set those numbers high. But if that's the case, then why not always set it high? You know, if you get this great sounding quality, why would you ever want to, set it low for whatever reason? And the answer to that question is there's a consequence of setting it high, and that consequence is storage, is room on your hard drive. How much space do you have available to store files? So a consequence of files with higher sample rates and greater bit depths is the higher storage capacity required to record them. So if you know that you have room on your hard drive, then you might want to just say, well, I'm going to record it high because I know I have the room. If you're recording a professional recording that you want to sound polished and sound really great, then you're going to want to use the high settings. but maybe you've got a scratch idea going on. You just want to record it so you don't forget. Maybe it's not something that you're ever going to develop into a professional recording, but you just need this rough draft or a demo. Maybe you're doing this for a friend who's asking for a favor, and so you know that it'll be good enough as it is at the lower qualities anyway. So those are the times where you'd want to record at the lower qualities when you don't want to take up that space on your hard drive. But let me assure you also that those lower qualities are just fine. In fact, those lower qualities, the 44.1, that's the quality of an audio CD from back in the old days. So that's still a great sounding recording that you're making. But there may be times where you want to get an even better sounding one. So anyway, you're going to have to make those decisions. And if it was me recording something that I wanted to perhaps share with the world and sound good, I would pick 24-bit, and then I'd also pick 96 kilohertz. And that's larger sample rate is going to help it to sound great. So let's see. So anyway, you have to make those kind of decisions. A WAV file is the default file when you set up, and it's pretty standard in Pro Tools to just have everything be WAV files. So then you push the create button, and when you do that, it creates a session, a Pro Tools session for you. So, oh, where did my session go? A session with this already, please choose, oh, okay, because I already used that. So let me rename this to example 2, and then push create. And I didn't push create. Oh, there it is. Oh, okay, great, yay. Okay, here's my Pro Tools session. I have different windows. We're gonna talk about what all these, just kind of what everything is that you see. But first, let's talk a little bit about the session file. Now, what happens when you create a session in Pro Tools, it automatically creates a session file with 5 folders in it, and it's where everything gets stored in your session. So there's an audio files folder, bounced files, clip groups, session files, backup, video files. Anyway, I'm going to start by clicking on this audio files, and when I do that, it shows me all the audio files that I've recorded in that session, and they all show up right here in that folder. Bounced files is where your bounced files show up, but what that means is you get to a point in your session where you're kind of finished and ready to hear how it sounds in your car stereo. So you export it or you bounce it to the disk, and then you can use that file and transport it to a different sound system, and you could see kind of like making a rough draft version and see what you need to change from there. But anyway, they're called your bounced files. There's a folder. Clip groups. Clips are something you work with in Pro Tools. It's basically an audio file that's in a track, and when you group them together, the groups show up in this folder. And the reason why that's cool is because you might be working on a different Pro Tools session and you want to use clips from a previous Pro Tools session. So you can go to this folder and you can find those clips really easily and import them into a different session. This file right here is called the Pro Tools session file, and that's what you double click on to open the file after you've already created it and you come back the next day and want to work on it again. So PTX is the abbreviation for a Pro Tools file. And then here it stores various versions of your Pro Tools file, because as you save it, it stores all your previous ones. So if for whatever reason you want to go back to the version of your song that you had 3 days ago, you can find that here and open it up there. Then a video folder. Pro Tools does work in videos. You can import video files and you can sync music to your video files. And this folder is the folder that stores all those video files. So anyway, I just want to point out what all those are, because as you start working in Pro Tools, you're going to be seeing those things. But this is the main window that you're going to be working in Pro Tools. It's called your edit window. And first of all, on the top row, you have all these different menus here. Some of them are going to be kind of familiar because in other software programs, you see them and use them, like the file menu. That's where you're going to go to create a new session, if you want to start something over. It's also where you're going to go to save your session. And it's where you go to import files or export things. And when you're ready to bounce your session after you finish your song, that's where you find your bounce button so that you can bounce it out of Pro Tools and have audio file of it. Your edit menu is where you do editing, where you have edit options. So your copy and paste kind of things are here, and other editing things that you can do to the tracks in Pro Tools, you find them here. The view menu is for viewing things inside your window and rearranging how you see things. So if I click on this rulers menu, I can put a time code here in the ruler section, and you see how time code just appeared, and it's right there because I went to view and I wanted to see it. I can also turn it off again, and then it disappears. Your track menu is where you go to select specific functions for your tracks that you're working on. The clip menu is a menu for working with your clips, and clips, once again, are audio signals that, or audio files that you use when you're working in Pro Tools. Basically, when you record and capture a sound, that file is called a clip. And so your tracks are full of clips. This event menu has to do with the tempo operations and the time operations, also the MIDI operations. When you start recording in MIDI, this is where you're gonna find things in there, like for MIDI, like quantize is an important thing to know what to do and how to do with MIDI. Audio Suite is a storage space for digital signal processing for effects. So eventually you want to add some reverb onto one of your tracks, so you can come here and select reverb or delay. So all of that you can find pretty quick in your Audio Suite menu. Options creates different options in the windows that you may or may not want, like pre and post roll for when you're recording, or loop playback, or loop record. These different options for ways of doing things inside of Pro Tools. Your setup is kind of an important place, because this is where the ins and outs of your software and hardware are. So hardware, your audio interface, software, the Pro Tools. So sometimes you have to come here because you're trying to do something and you don't have any sound. So let me just help you real quick just to know where the playback engine is. So in the setup menu is where you find the playback engine. And that's an important place to go, because sometimes you're going to try and use Pro Tools and you won't hear anything, and you're going to hit your head against the wall and say, why isn't it working? Come here to the playback engine and make sure you have your audio interface selected. So the name of my audio interface is the Scarlett by Focusrite. And right here, I open this menu and my Scarlett comes up and I have a check mark by it. Therefore, it's selected. And just a warning, if you do find that it's not on your audio interface and then you select it, it's going to want to restart your session. So if I click off this, it's going to say, can I restart this session now? But I don't actually want to restart because I want to stay on Scarlett. So anyway, the playback engine is going to help you to solve some problems when you get there. Also in the playback engine is this hardware buffer size, HW buffer. And the hardware buffer has to do with your computer's ability to process your session in Pro Tools. The more tracks you add to Pro Tools, the more things you record into it, and then you start adding effects on there, like reverb and delay. The more you add into your session, the more your computer has to work to process all of that. The result could be latency. So the audio signal is not in line with where it should be when you're listening back, and that can be kind of frustrating. So a good rule about the latency, if you're experiencing that, you come here to the hardware buffer size. When you're recording your project, set your hardware buffer size low, so like 64 samples or maybe a little higher. So set it low when you're recording, but after you finish the recording phase and you move on to mixing, where you start adding more effects in and stuff, and that gets harder to process, then set your hardware buffer size to a larger number, and that will help with the mixing. So you want to know how to navigate that number, because otherwise you could be having this latency thing happening, and that's just kind of frustrating. So anyway, that's all in the setup window. So you want to know where the setup window is. The window menu is for seeing different windows. So right now we're looking at the edit window. If I wanted to, I could open up the big counter, and now the big counter window is here. And so if I push play, you see it counting, and oh, I already had a CPU overload. This happens often when increasing the hardware. Okay, so that already happened. When did I set that to? Just a second ago. And well, it's on 256. Okay, let me set it down lower, see what happens. But anyway, so with this window, you can, the window menu allows you to pick different windows to pick from, and you can see different windows. There's two main windows. There's the edit window that we're looking at, and there's also the mix window right here. Both of these windows are blank, and so right now it's hard to see what they look like. So let me very quickly just put some tracks into Pro Tools. So I'm gonna add some tracks. Let's add 3 mono tracks, and then just for fun, let's say 2 stereo tracks. And I'm gonna be showing you more about how to figure this out later. And then let's add 1 instrument track and push create. And when I do that, I see all the tracks I created right here in the edit window. They all come up on the left, and this instrument track is brown, but the previous 5 tracks are blue, the audio tracks. Now when I switch to my mixer window, now I can actually see that it looks like a mixer, and I can see the faders and the knobs and everything that will allow me to do mixing here. So in this mixing window, you have the inserts on top, and that's a place where you're going to insert effects, for example. So you just click on it and you choose one, and boom, pops up right there. And then right here, you get kind of like a hardware device where you can twist the knobs to change the way that things are going to sound on it. So that's the inserts, and that's where you're going to add that kind of stuff. The sends are for when you're routing this track. So this first track here, if I wanted to route it to 3 and 4, I would pick that bus right there, and then it's routed to 3 and 4. So anyway, that's where you do that. Inputs and outputs is a very important thing to know. Here's because you're going to try and record, and if you don't have an input selected, you won't be able to record on that track. So here I'm selecting input 1. You see how it says that? And when I do that, I'm basically choosing input 1 right here, this guy. Here's input 2. So whatever microphone is plugged into input 1 right here is going to go into this track that I just selected as input 1. The next track over here is already selected as input 2, so the second mic would be routed to this track. Automation, usually this is just on read, and that's kind of default, and we can get into more about changing that later. This is the panning button, so you can pan that audio signal to the right or to the left, depending on how you want to twist it. And then right here is the volume fader. So if your volume, if the fader is tall like this, that means you're going to be loud. If you put it down like this, it's soft. Now, there's a couple buttons here as well. In order to record, you have to push that red button there. That's called the record enable button. And that basically says that this track is the track that's going to be recorded on. If I push that button on the next track over, that means both of those tracks, 2 tracks, are going to be recorded on at the same time. So it is possible to record on more than 1 track at a time. And then you have this S and M button right here. S is for solo, M is for mute. So if I have a track with, 6 tracks right here, and I push solo, that means the only track you're going to hear in playback is this 1 track that's soloed. And if I push mute on it, that means I'm going to hear the other 5 tracks, but I won't hear this track that has been muted. So sometimes it's helpful when you're recording things, you mute tracks or you solo a track because you're trying to listen to things as you're figuring things out. Anyway, this is the mixer window, and it's a very important window. So you have your edit window here, your mix window here. If you could see my fingers, I'm just pushing Command and the plus sign clear up here. And when you push Command and plus, it toggles back and forth between those 2 windows really quickly. And I just wanted to show you that because these are the 2 main windows in Pro Tools that you're going to be working in most of the time. And it's going to be really handy if you can just jump back and forth really quick by pushing that button. A couple of other windows really quick, and then we're going to be finished. I'm going to come up here to the window menu, and I'm going to select Midi Editor window, because eventually we're going to be working in MIDI. And here I am drawing some MIDI notes in here with this pencil. Isn't that cool? Isn't that fun? Wow, it's pretty easy to do. So this is the MIDI Editor window. It has a little virtual keyboard right here too. And when you have an instrument hooked up, you can push on the keys and it'll make sounds. But look up here at these two music notes, and if you click on those, it will take you to the score editor window, the companion of Midi Editor. And another way you could write MIDI is by actually inputting notes into the score. And sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't. Oh, there we go. There's one. Come on, you can do it. Yeah, so anyway, you can draw notes in here, and then you can toggle back and forth between the two, and you'll see those notes appear right there. Now, we're not really getting into MIDI production today, but we will be later on in the semester. But in order to actually hear that MIDI, I have to come over here to the mixer, the mixer window, and here's my instrument one. The brown one is MIDI, and I have to come here on an insert, and I have to put an instrument on there so it'll sound. I'm going to pick expand 2, and when I pick, it opens up expand. You won't be able to hear any notes until you can hear. See, you can start pushing the keys, and then you start hearing sounds for them. Anyway, you won't be able to hear any MIDI until you have assigned an instrument to that MIDI track. And then also remember this, instrument track is MIDI track. So when you're trying to work with MIDI, make sure you select an instrument track, not the other one that you can select, which is the MIDI track. Yeah, it says MIDI, so you think it's MIDI. That's for an external MIDI controller. But when you're creating inside the program, you want to use the instrument track. Boom. Okay, anyway, I think that wraps it up for today. That's it. So hopefully you'll be able to figure out Pro Tools okay. Send me some emails with any questions you have, or just find a time to meet with me and we can do a video chat and you can ask me and we can pull up Pro Tools through the video and talk about it together. But thank you for coming to class, and I'll see you next time.